"Excuse me, stewardess. I believe this man is lost." "Coach is that way." Karen's voice cut through the cabin like a rusty nail dragged across polished glass. She pointed at me, seat 1A, her acrylic nails gleaming like claws. The flight attendant glanced at my ticket, nodded with a forced smile, and walked away. Karen wasn't satisfied. She leaned toward me, voice loud enough to alert the front half of the plane. "People like you don't belong in first class." I slowly turned my head to face her, gave the most polite smile I could muster, and replied, "I agree. But I'm not here for the snacks." Beneath my plain black hoodie, tucked in a shoulder holster, was a loaded Glock 19 and a federal badge. Because today, I wasn't just flying to Dallas, I was the Air Marshal on board. And Karen had just picked the wrong guy on the wrong day at 35,000 feet. I boarded early. It's standard procedure: blend in, scan the passengers, track behavioral cues. No flashy clothes, no attention. The airline had upgraded me to first class without knowing why I was really there. They just saw a last-minute ticket, government-issued ID, and figured I had important business. I did. Seat 12C had just been flagged by a partner agency. Middle-aged male, solo traveler, using a stolen passport. But before I could even clock his body language, Karen made herself the main attraction. She entered the plane wearing leopard print leggings, a fur-collared vest in late spring, and sunglasses the size of salad plates. Dragging a suitcase far too large for overhead, she barked at the flight attendant, "Make room, I don't do checked bags." She swiveled her head until she saw me already seated. That's when her nose crinkled, as if I was the smell in seat 1A and not the paying customer. The comments started soft. Sighs, tuts, whispers. "Must have upgraded with points. They'll let anyone up here these days." I heard every word, not because I was trying to eavesdrop, but because Karen didn't understand how volume works. Or manners. I ignored it. That's part of the job. You don't make waves. You observe. Let people show you who they are. Once we were in the air, the flight attendant offered champagne. I politely declined. Karen did not. "Two, please," she said, grinning. "We're celebrating." The flight attendant raised an eyebrow. "Celebrating what, ma'am?" Karen laughed as if it were obvious. "A full row with no riffraff." She turned to wink at me, like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. I stared out the window. 15 minutes into the flight, I got the first ping on my secure app. Possible secondary target on board. Female, early 30s, traveling under alias, suspected courier. Row 14. Now I was watching two people. Row 12C and row 14A. Neither looked at each other. No contact. That could mean they weren't connected, or they were very good. Karen had other concerns. The chicken entree was too spicy. The seat warmer was malfunctioning. The pillows smelled foreign. She summoned the flight attendant 5 times in 20 minutes, each more dramatic than the last. But when the attendant finally asked her to lower her voice for the comfort of other passengers, Karen hissed, "You'd never speak to him like that," gesturing toward me. "I've flown with this airline for 12 years. I know the CEO personally." I made a mental note to suggest the airline update its customer filter. I took a stroll through the cabin, not because I needed to stretch, but because both my flagged passengers had shifted their body posture at the same time. Subtle, but coordinated. As I passed by Karen, she stuck out her leg slightly, causing me to bump it. "Watch where you're going," she snapped. "You people are always clumsy." She said it low, but not low enough. A woman across the aisle looked up sharply. Karen turned red. I kept walking. In coach, a young girl played a video game on silent. A man snored softly against the window. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I passed 14A, I noticed something. The woman's bag, wedged beneath the seat, had an extra tag, one from an overseas customs checkpoint that didn't match her reported travel history. Bingo. I returned to my seat. Karen leaned over. "So what do you do, exactly?" she asked, lips curled like she'd tasted spoiled milk. "Let me guess. IT. I gave her a slow blink. Something like that. She laughed. Figures. You dress like a janitor. I kept my face blank, but I imagined a scenario where she said that in front of the training room at Quantico. The recruits would have torn her apart. But this wasn't a classroom. This was live. The captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting mild turbulence. Please return to your seats. Karen clutched the armrests dramatically. Oh no, I get anxiety, she wailed. I need another drink. The flight attendant calmly declined, citing FAA regulations. That's when Karen stood up. You can't refuse me. I have medical needs. She whipped out a glittery pill case. I need vodka to activate these. The turbulence hadn't even started yet. While everyone was distracted by her one-woman panic play, Row 12C slipped something from his sock into his shirt pocket. Tiny. Could have been a capsule. Could have been a key. Could have been deadly. I activated the silent ping. Status yellow. Prepare to intercept. Karen stomped to the bathroom despite being told to remain seated. She pounded on the door when it was occupied. Some of us have needs, she screeched. A baby cried in response from the rear cabin. Karen rolled her eyes. Babies in coach should be banned. As she returned to her seat, muttering, she stopped in front of me and hissed, You're making everyone uncomfortable. People like you always do. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. The tension rippled like a snapped seatbelt. I looked her in the eye. You're right, I said quietly. I am making people uncomfortable. But not for the reasons you think. I leaned back, thumb tracing the edge of the badge beneath my jacket. Because if things went south in the next 30 minutes, Karen wasn't going to be the biggest problem on this plane. She was just the loudest. Karen demanded more champagne. The flight attendant, clearly worn thin, gave a patient smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, I'll check with the captain, ma'am. Karen rolled her eyes like she was doing the plane a favor by staying on board. I'll check with the CEO if you don't, she muttered under her breath, loud enough to be heard 3 rows back. I stayed still, quietly noting that her behavior was entering the disruptive zone, technically not illegal, but the kind of passenger that can become a liability during emergencies. Meanwhile, my real focus was split between rows 12 and 14. The man in 12C had now loosened his belt and slid a hand behind his seat cushion. The woman in 14A had pulled out a travel pillow and was faking sleep, but her breathing was off, too shallow, too rhythmic, like someone timing their breaths to stay still without actually relaxing. These weren't rookies. These were people who'd rehearsed. As the turbulence finally arrived, Karen let out a dramatic gasp, grasping the armrest of the man next to her, who, by the look on his face, regretted every life choice that led him to this flight. Don't worry, she told him, as if she were the one in charge. I'm a very important flyer. The guy just nodded and turned back to his book. A small bump rocked the plane again, and Karen snapped at the flight attendant returning down the aisle. Why didn't the pilot warn us again? I could have spilled my drink. There was no drink in her hand, but logic wasn't really Karen's strong suit. I used the moment to unbuckle and slowly walk toward the galley. To any other passenger, I was just a bored guy stretching his legs, but I needed to pass by row 12C and 14A without raising alarms. As I did, I caught a glimpse of the man's shirt. There was a faint bulge now where there hadn't been one before. Something was hidden beneath it. Not a phone. Too rigid. Not a passport. Too thick. He looked up for just a second, eyes catching mine. He looked away fast, but not fast enough. Guilty people always look away too late. Back in the galley, I quietly informed the head flight attendant. I need you to stay calm. We may have a security issue on board. Do not alert anyone. But I want eyes on 12C and 14A. Any strange behavior, movement, tampering, bathroom breaks, notify me instantly. She nodded with the seriousness of someone who had been trained for this, but never expected to actually need it. As I made my way back to my seat, Karen flagged me down with a wave, as if she had just remembered I existed. You, she said accusingly. Can you help me? This seat isn't reclining properly. I think it's because you bumped it earlier. Or maybe it's just defective like your attitude. I gave her a blank look. The seat works fine, I said, which only made her huff louder. Well, it shouldn't take a genius to know something's wrong. Do you work in maintenance, or what? Before I could respond, the guy in 1B leaned over and said, Ma'am, please. I'm trying to read. Karen turned on him instantly. Oh, I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. Didn't realize I was surrounded by such fragile men. Then she flopped back into her seat with such force that her tray table popped open and launched her uneaten salad into her lap. This airline is a joke, she muttered, stabbing lettuce like it had personally insulted her. As she fussed with the mess, I scanned the rest of the cabin. No sudden moves. But the woman in 14A had just opened her overhead bin. That wasn't normal during turbulence. I rose and casually walked back. As I passed her, I glanced inside the bin. Nothing suspicious. Just a backpack and a coat. But her hand was now inside her travel pillow's zipper compartment. Unusual. I returned to my seat, heart rate steady but thoughts racing. If this was what I thought it was, if two separate mules were transporting something illegal, then we weren't just dealing with entitled passengers and petty complaints anymore. This was an active smuggling operation, possibly connected to an international ring. Karen chose that moment to let out a theatrical sigh. Honestly, I don't feel safe with him here, she said loudly, pointing to me. He's been pacing the plane and eavesdropping. I think he's casing us or something. That word. Casing. Like she watched one crime show and decided she was an FBI profiler. The flight attendant stepped in quickly. Ma'am, he's a passenger just like you. He hasn't violated any policies. Karen shook her head. Passengers don't act like that. He's sweating. You see that? He's nervous. Maybe he's hiding something. The irony of that statement nearly made me laugh out loud. If only she knew. Another ping came through my secure device. The suspect in 12C had a record. Suspicion of trafficking in Belgium, charges drop. Multiple aliases. No known violent history, but highly evasive. And now flying domestic under an ID that wasn't his. The woman in 14A had no criminal record, but was flagged in a recent customs sweep for suspicious travel patterns. Short stays in major cities, always alone, always light luggage. Karen stood up suddenly. I demand to speak to the pilot. The flight attendant tried to block her. Ma'am, you need to remain seated. We're experiencing turbulence. Karen pushed past her, causing the cart to tip slightly. Water cups slid onto the floor. A baby began crying in the distance. Karen turned to me again. Do something. Why are you just sitting there like some kind of mute bouncer? That was it. She had become a flight risk, not just an annoyance. She was now a passenger interfering with flight crew operations. I stood. Ma'am, I said clearly, you need to sit down. Now. Karen laughed, actually laughed. Oh, you're giving me orders now? Who do you think you are? I reached into my coat just enough to flash my badge, angled so only she could see it. Her mouth dropped open. No sound came out. Just a tiny wheeze, like her ego deflated all at once. The flight attendant, catching on, gently took Karen by the arm. Let's get you back to your seat. Karen walked like a robot, eyes locked on me the whole way. She finally sat down, dazed. The man beside her leaned in and whispered, Told you to stop talking. I remained standing near the galley as the plane hit another patch of turbulence. My hand rested on my hip, inches from the weapon I hoped I wouldn't need to draw today. Because somewhere behind me, a man with a fake name and a woman with a zipper pillow weren't just waiting to land. They were waiting for something else. And whatever it was about to happen. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as we crossed into high-altitude airspace, cruising over the Midwest. Most passengers had settled into that half-sleep, half-wake trance where every noise sounds suspicious, every creak feels like a lurch. But my eyes stayed wide open. I had 2 suspects with shifting behavior, and a third wildcard who, while not criminal, was potentially just as dangerous in a different way. Karen had gone quiet since I flashed my badge, but her ego wasn't dead, it was just circling for another opportunity to flare. I knew her type. Entitlement never sleeps. It waits for an audience. Then came the shift. The man in 12C reached under his shirt and adjusted something. The bulge had changed position, slightly lower now. I'd seen drug mules do this, shifting body packs to avoid detection during random pat-downs. If he was smuggling, the fact that he'd risk readjusting mid-flight meant whatever he was carrying wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. Possibly volatile. The flight attendants had begun prepping for mid-flight service. The drink carts squeaked forward, breaking the illusion of calm. I stood and walked slowly to the lavatories near the rear of the plane, using the moment to scan every row again. The woman in 14A was now sipping water and avoiding eye contact with anyone, but her posture had changed. Her backpack was now under her knees, not in the overhead where I'd seen it earlier. That violated flight rules and drew my attention harder than any other cue. She was protecting it now. That bag meant something. As I returned to my seat, Karen popped up like a jack-in-the-box. "Oh look," she said, clearly not ready to give up her role as in-flight theater lead. "It's Captain's secret again. Back from his patrol of the peasants." I ignored her. That only made her louder. "I still don't understand why a man with a badge is sitting back here like a passenger. Shouldn't you be in the cockpit playing pilot cosplay or something?" The man in 1B muttered something into his hand. I couldn't hear it, but by Karen's flaring nostrils, it wasn't complimentary. I stayed calm, because the worst thing you can do in a situation like this is take the bait. I needed the attention off me, not escalating around me. Still, her voice rose again as she demanded to know if I had the right to be on board at all. I gave her a hard stare. She recoiled just slightly. It was all I needed. I sat down, eyes on the cabin, heart rate ticking up. That's when the turbulence came. Not the soft, rolling kind from earlier, but a hard jolt that knocked a couple of drinks onto tray tables and made the intercom crackle. The captain's voice came on, calm but clipped. "Flight attendants, please secure the cabin immediately. We're entering a rough patch." The lights flickered briefly. For most passengers, it was a moment to buckle in and clutch their armrests. For me, it was the first real sign that things were moving. Turbulence is unpredictable, yes. But professional smugglers often trigger chaos to cover their move. It's a distraction strategy, pure and simple. In that moment of shaking and confusion, the man in 12C bent forward, pretending to grab something from under his seat. When he sat back up, the bulge on his chest was gone. It was now under his jacket. I tapped my encrypted phone. Code yellow escalated to code orange. Immediate risk. 2 rows back, the woman in 14A now had her tray table down and her bag open just slightly. Inside, I saw what looked like a slim metal case, something smaller than a laptop, but too dense to be makeup or toiletries. She was looking around casually, pretending to check her phone. But I saw it. She passed a tiny nod to 12C. Almost imperceptible. But I caught it. Karen chose that exact moment to stagger up again, blaming the seatbelt for strangling her circulation. She walked toward the front, holding her neck like she was choking, and disappeared into the first-class lavatory. I thought she was being dramatic again. But then 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Still no Karen. The seatbelt sign was still on. Flight attendants began looking at each other. A light knock on the door. No response. The head attendant turned to me, her voice low. She locked it from the inside. "We've tried calling." No answer. I nodded and stood. At the very least, she might be passed out or trying to create another scene. At worst, she could be tampering with equipment. Karen was a lot of things, but she wasn't above chaos if it meant getting attention. I unlocked the door with the universal latch key. Inside, Karen sat on the toilet lid, clutching an open vodka mini she must have smuggled in her purse. Her eyes were wide, glassy. You can't stop me," she slurred. "I have rights." I gently took the bottle, handed it off, and helped her up. As she stumbled into the aisle, she shouted, "This man is detaining me! Somebody help!" Her voice pierced the cabin, causing heads to turn and babies to cry. She collapsed into her seat, breathing heavy, mascara running. The distraction worked, but not for her. In the chaos, the woman in 14A had slipped the metal case into the magazine pouch on the seat in front of her and was now pretending to read SkyMall. The man in 12C was watching the commotion like he was at a drive-in movie. I had no time left. We were 40 minutes from descent, and if this was an active handoff of contraband, possibly explosives or data, the transfer was either complete or just about to be. I stood again and walked toward 14A. She saw me coming and tried to tuck the case deeper into the seat pocket. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "I need to speak with you." She didn't move. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice flat. I didn't answer. I simply leaned down, retrieved the case with a gloved hand from my pocket, and held it up. The man in 12C stood up. Not a smart move. "Sit down," I said sharply, voice full air Marshal now. He froze. The passengers near him recoiled slightly. The woman in 14A tried to protest. "That's mine," she said, a little too fast. I raised the case. "We'll find out soon enough." The head attendant stepped in. "We'll secure the front. You need backup?" I shook my head. "Not unless he moves." The man sat back down. Behind me, Karen mumbled something about needing a refund for emotional distress, but nobody was listening anymore. All eyes were on me, the case, and the two suddenly very still suspects whose cover had just evaporated at 35,000 feet. I returned to my seat, case in hand, two suspects separated, and Karen weeping into a crumpled napkin. I radioed the ground team. "Confirm code orange. 2 suspects, items secured. Prepare for intercept on landing." The storm wasn't over, but the plane was still steady. For now. Karen was quiet, but not because she'd found humility. She was calculating, simmering beneath layers of smeared foundation and wounded pride. Her seatmate had turned away, arms crossed and headphones in, pretending she didn't exist. Most of the cabin still whispered, stealing glances in my direction like I'd just stepped out of a spy movie. They weren't far off. The metal case sat beneath my feet, its contents unknown but potentially explosive in every sense. The woman in 14A had gone still, and the man in 12C hadn't spoken a word since I retrieved the item. That silence was louder than any outburst. It was the quiet of a plan collapsing, the sound of fear taking over. The lead flight attendant knelt by my seat and spoke softly. "We've notified the captain. We're clearing the front galley for the landing protocol. Police will be waiting on the jet bridge." I nodded. I'd already relayed everything through secure comms. We had names, seating assignments, travel histories, probable cause. Still, what concerned me most wasn't the contraband, it was the absence of resistance. No panic. No fight. No attempt to recover the item. Which meant either they knew they were caught and had accepted the outcome, or something else was still in motion. Karen suddenly snapped upright and raised her hand like she was hailing a cab. "Excuse me," she called out to no one in particular. "I'd like to speak with someone from the airline about the trauma I've just endured. I will need compensation. And possibly therapy." The flight attendant ignored her, focused entirely on the secured aisle. That didn't sit well with Karen. I said, "I was detained by someone impersonating law enforcement. I don't even know if he's real." I turned in my seat. "You saw the badge." Karen flinched slightly but held her ground. "Anyone can buy a badge online. This whole thing has been handled improperly. I'm documenting all of this." She pulled out her phone and tried to record, but a quick wave of my ID again sent her phone clattering to the floor. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, rage, disbelief, entitlement. The idea that someone like me could outrank her worldview was too much for her to process. Passengers around her groaned. One guy muttered, "Lady, sit down before you get tossed." Another whispered, "I swear, if she delays this landing, I'm suing her." For the first time, Karen realized she'd lost her audience. No gasps, no allies, no support. Just a plane full of annoyed travelers who had witnessed her entire spiral from smug superiority to mid-air meltdown. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on rows 12 and 14. Neither suspect moved. But something about the woman's posture kept bugging me. She wasn't tense. She was waiting. Like a person who'd placed a bet and was watching the dice roll. That's when it hit me. The case wasn't the primary handoff. It was a decoy. A test. Something low stakes enough to be sacrificed if needed. The real item, whatever it was still on board. I moved quickly and quietly, walking past the suspects row without pausing, scanning each seat for signs of luggage or swapped items. And there it was. A rolled scarf tucked between 13A and 13B, barely visible, wedged under a life vest compartment. I signaled the flight attendant with a subtle hand motion and reached down to retrieve it. Inside, wrapped in fabric and heat-sealed plastic, was a thumb drive. Not just any drive. Military-grade, double-layered encryption casing, heat-resistant. I didn't need to plug it in to know what this was. Karen, of course, took my movement as an opportunity to speak again. This is what I mean. He's just walking around, grabbing people's things. I don't feel safe. He's a menace. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I realized she wasn't just attention-seeking anymore. She was unraveling. Her sense of power had crumbled, and with it, her control. She was spiraling into pure panic disguised as indignation. The captain's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making our final descent shortly. Please ensure your seats are upright and tray tables are stowed." That was the cue. The suspects were still, but I wasn't taking any chances. I walked to the rear galley and whispered to the flight crew. "Lock both lavatories. I don't want either suspect moving before we land. If they try, stall them. Say there's a maintenance issue." The crew nodded. One attendant offered a quiet, "Godspeed," that made me smirk despite the tension. As I passed Karen again, she stood, fully defying the landing order. "I will not sit until someone explains what's happening. This is a clear violation of passenger rights, and I demand a refund and an apology." She turned to me. "And you think you're better than everyone here just because you have a badge and a fake sense of authority. But you're just another thug with government cosplay." I stepped close to her, low enough that only she could hear me. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you sit down before you add obstruction of justice to your list of bad decisions." Her lips quivered. She opened her mouth to reply, then paused. For one glorious second she sat. The rest of the descent was quiet, except for the occasional sniffle from Karen and the dry, hollow looks between the suspects. When the wheels touched down and the brakes engaged, the tension snapped like a rubber band. Passengers applauded, not for the landing, but for survival. The plane taxied toward the gate. As soon as we docked, I stood and blocked the aisle. "Nobody exits until instructed," I said clearly. "Federal operation underway." Gasps rippled. Karen started to stand again. "But I have connections, important people. I will not be treated like this." She turned to the man next to her, who didn't even glance her way. "Tell them who I am," she snapped. He stared straight ahead. Uniformed officers boarded. I pointed out the suspects. 12C was handcuffed without incident. 14A tried to plead innocence. "I don't know what he's talking about. That case isn't mine." Then the thumb drive came out. Her face dropped. It was over. Karen, of course, saw the uniforms and thought they were for her. "Thank God you're here," she said, stepping into the aisle. "That man has been terrorizing the cabin for hours. I want to press charges." One of the officers gently moved her aside. She blinked. "Wait, you're not here for me?" He ignored her. The officer turned to me. "Agent, anything else?" I shook my head. "We're clear." They'll be processed together. Karen stood in the middle of the aisle, jaw open. You really were law enforcement? I gave her a nod. Have a pleasant day, ma'am. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought you were just a nobody. That was the thing about people like her. They only see the uniform when it matches their expectations. But by then, it's always too late. Karen stood on the jet bridge like she had just woken from a fever dream, blinking under the harsh fluorescent lights as reality finally caught up with her. The law enforcement officers weren't here to console her, coddle her, or confirm her delusions. They were moving with purpose, focused on the suspects behind her, not the entitled woman in leopard print still clinging to the idea that she was the most important person in the room. She stepped to the side as the woman from 14A was escorted past, flanked by 2 agents. The man from 12C followed, head down, eyes dead ahead. Karen watched them, confused, still trying to rewrite the narrative in her head. She turned to one of the officers and asked, So, you're just going to let him walk around with a gun and threaten people? The agent glanced at me, then back at her, and said, Ma'am, he's federal. He's the one who called us. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning puppet. She looked at me, and for the first time in the entire flight, she was speechless. I didn't need a victory lap. Her face was enough. Her expression wasn't just embarrassed, it was obliterated. Every ounce of superiority had drained from her eyes, replaced with the hollow realization that not only had she been wrong, but she'd broadcasted it to a full cabin of witnesses, including a man who'd quietly protected everyone on board while she threw tantrums over sparkling water and seat reclines. I handed off the confiscated items to the ground agent. The thumb drive would go straight to forensic data analysts. The case would be X-rayed, scanned, and picked apart by customs enforcement. The suspects would be separated, interrogated, and tracked through every digital footprint they'd ever made. It was a win. Quiet, methodical, and clean. Just the way I liked it. The passengers began filing off the plane, most of them shooting me a grateful glance, a nod, a whispered thanks. A little girl with tangled pigtails waved at me with both hands. An elderly couple patted my shoulder as they passed. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was genuine. And that meant more. Karen lingered, as if hoping someone would ask her to stay for an apology that would never come. She stood next to a security officer, and began recounting her version of events. I was just trying to keep the peace, she said. That man was suspicious. He kept walking around like he owned the plane. And I've flown this airline dozens of times. I have status. I know what's normal. The officer didn't respond. He was looking past her, toward me. Karen noticed and followed his gaze. You know, she said, switching tactics, maybe I overreacted a little. But how was I supposed to know? He doesn't look like a federal agent. She laughed nervously. He looks like someone you'd call security on, not someone who provides it. I walked past her without stopping. She grabbed at the air like she wanted to say something more, but even her words had given up on her. Outside the gate, media vans were already pulling up. A leak from someone in the airport must have tipped them off. A major smuggling bust midair was headline gold. I bypassed them through a side corridor and met my supervisor in a secured room near baggage claim. She was already reading preliminary updates from the analysts. Thumb drive's encrypted, but we're 90% sure it's linked to that lab data leak in Frankfurt, she said without looking up. Nice work. I nodded and peeled off the jacket I'd worn for the entire flight. Any idea who they were working for? She shrugged. Could be private buyers, could be state actors. We'll know more once the files are cracked. But either way, you bagged 2 big ones today. I didn't care much about credit. I just wanted confirmation that the passengers were safe and the suspects were contained. Everything else was just noise. I grabbed a cup of coffee from a staff vending area and took a seat near the window overlooking the tarmac. The plane we'd just landed in was being refueled and cleaned. A new crew waited by the boarding gate, prepping for the next flight. Just another Tuesday in the sky. And then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Reddit. Someone had uploaded a blurry cell phone video from the flight. The caption read, entitled "Karen Screams at a Federal Air Marshal, Regrets It Instantly." The video was only a minute long, capturing the moment Karen demanded my removal, followed by the quick flash of my badge and the stunned silence that followed. The comments section was already on fire. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments. The internet's appetite for poetic justice was bottomless. One comment read, "This dude handled it like John Wick with patience." Another said, "Karen met a real boss mid-flight. I bet she's Googling how to disappear right now." I chuckled softly. The internet didn't always get it right, but this time they nailed the tone. I put the phone away and sipped the coffee. The bitter heat grounded me more than any briefing or debriefing ever could. I'd done my job. Quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. Well, not counting Karen's contribution. I got up to leave, heading toward the garage where a plain black SUV waited to take me to the field office. As I passed through the terminal, I caught sight of Karen again. She was seated in the customer relations area, loudly arguing with an airline representative. "You don't understand," she said, her voice still shrill, still desperate. "I have a right to know who he is. What if he was lying? What if this was some kind of setup?" The rep gave her a tired look and said, "Ma'am, multiple federal agents confirmed his identity. There's nothing more to discuss." Karen sat back, defeated. Alone. Not arrested. Not fined. Just irrelevant. That was her punishment. No viral video of her being hauled off in handcuffs. No satisfying courtroom scene. Just public humiliation, digital infamy, and the cold sting of knowing that no one, not even the airline she claimed to know so well, was going to take her side. As I stepped into the SUV and the door shut behind me, I finally let myself smile. Not because I liked taking people down, but because I knew Karen would never forget that flight. Every time she stepped onto a plane from now on, she'd think twice before running her mouth. She'd check every plain-clothed passenger and wonder, could that be another Marshal? Another agent? Someone else ready to remind her that status doesn't equal superiority? And me? I'd be on another flight next week. New plane. New passengers. Same seat. Quiet, calm, prepared. Always watching.